for the Prevention of Domestic Violence. If you've never heard of us, I get it. We're a very, very small state agency. There's about 36 of us. We are a state agency. No other state has one of us. We've been around about 30 years. And our job is to really advise the governor and the legislature on how to deliver domestic, sexual, and gender-based violence services in the state of New York, which I'm sure you can all imagine has really changed in the past 30 years. The way we think about this, who we engage in this work, and the way in which we need to address it differently. When we built this system 30 years ago, and I was one of those women I know I don't look that old, but I am. In the early stages, it was women talking to women, and women getting out of abusive relationships and what that looked like. But over the past couple of years, we've really decided, right, we need to be more inclusive in this work, not only about who we serve around gender-based violence, but the conversations that we have. And one of the reasons that we're here today is because we came here. So when did we come here, Rob? April. So early spring, we came here because we administer the Enough is Enough programs, the prevention piece of the programs. And we came here to Syracuse University, one, because I'm a Syracuse alum, but also because Syracuse was willing to sit down and talk to us about what we all could be doing better. And in that conversation, I brought up the fact that we were engaging with the Lieutenant Governor and talking about how we can engage men and boys in this work differently. And Rob said to me, well, are you working with Don McPherson? I said, no, but I would love to work with Don McPherson. So we got connected. And since then, Don and OPDV have really been thinking about how do we do this work better and what do we do to engage men and boys in a conversation that's meaningful, right? Because, well, Don will get into it a little more, and so we're all panelists about, how do we change? We obviously we aren't having the same conversations that we wanted to have 30 years ago. But how do we all get to a place where we agree that intimate partner violence needs to stop? And how do we give one another, all of us, the tools to do that? So that's what we're here to talk about tonight with this great panel, and I'll let them all introduce themselves in a second. But we also want to say to you, we're here because we don't want to be in an echo chamber. Those of us who do this work know that we need to hear from you about what you need and how you need to think about this work together with us. So I'm going to let Don introduce himself in a second, but I think I'm going to let the panel go. So I'm going to let you guys go and just 30 seconds on who you are and why you're here.
Is it on? Okay. So hi, nice to meet you guys. My name is Adam. I am with the Barnes Center at the Arch. I am a peer educator. So I'm the level with you guys, with students, teaching each other things for alcohol, safety, things of that nature. I'm actually a sophomore. I'm majoring in accounting and finance, and first time meeting Don, but it's a great opportunity being here with you guys.
Yeah, I'm Joe Horan. I'm the executive director of a Building Men program. We are a group mentoring program of the boys of Syracuse. So in the city school district, we're in 23 different schools, and we talk to our young men about being a man, not the man, right? And we want them to be whole and spiritually, physically, mentally, and socially. And so we just try to help our boys navigate this trying times that you guys are in. So it's a pleasure to be here.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brian Bloom. I am a doctoral intern at the Barnes Center. So I split my time between the counseling center and athletics. And in my short career, I have seen the effects of toxic masculinity and what masculinity can do to mental health. So I'm hoping to continue that conversation here today.
How y'all doing? My name is Jordan Pierre. I'm currently a master's student. I'm getting my master's in television, radio, and film within Newhouse. I'm also a student leader and a social media influencer. I'm from Brooklyn, New York, and I'm also a member of the Delta Zeta chapter of Alpha Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. For those who don't know who that is, that's a fraternity within the Divine Nine here on campus.
Good evening. Good evening. I'm Jared Woodfork. I am a Chief Assistant District Attorney. I'm the Chief of the Special Victims Bureau here in the Onondaga County DA's office. My unit handles cases involving children, physical and sexual violence, as well as elder abuse and abuse of persons with disabilities, as well as obviously what we're here to talk about today, domestic violence, and those relationships and those dynamics. I manage all of the ADAs that handle all of the cases throughout this county, and I help promote some of the programs that we have to get in the mix of what's happening and how we can end those domestic violence cases and not just prosecute those as well.
Thank you all. And I just want to say the ADA, we recently had him at a very important meeting, and he moved all of us that have been in this work a really long time about his words and how he handled a particular case that we were looking at. So I just wanted to say that we were like, we should get him. So we did. I also want to recognize Rob. Rob, thank you so much for your partnership and having us here. And also George. George is from Vera House, and George does this work as well around accountability and all that stuff. So George is our partner as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Don, and I'm going to stop talking because this isn't my show anymore.
Do we need that mic? Can you all hear okay with this? You have control of the mics, Rocco? Can you all hear okay? Okay. So my name is Don McPherson, and for those of you who know, I see some familiar faces from some of the organizations that we worked with over the past couple of years doing this work. I'm gonna really want to focus and hear from these guys this evening, but just a little background on the partnership with OPDV, as well as my work here on campus. I was a student athlete here a very, very, very long time ago, and I was a student athlete, played football here, studied psychology, and then played professionally for a few years. And then when I retired in 1994, I went to work at the Center for the Study of Sport and Society at Northeastern University in Boston. And that's when I went there to do work around what I thought was going to be work around racism in sport. But that was the year shortly after a guy named Jackson Katz created something called the Mentors in Violence Prevention Program. And it was the first program to introduce bystander to gender-based violence prevention work. And what's really kind of important about this conversation, in 1994, when I came to the work, it was about the prevention of men's violence against women, and saying very, very specifically men's violence, because overwhelmingly the violence that OPDV and other organizations like Vera House, where George works and has worked for many years, has been about preventing sexual and domestic violence. And when I started doing the work and it was about engaging men in that conversation, there was very little, if anything, in the literature about me. It was about men who had been incarcerated, men who were under some sort of state supervision in one way or another, or boys who were under some sort of supervision for mental health or other reasons. There was nothing about the guy I grew up on Long Island. My parents were together till the day they died. I had a pool in the backyard. I grew up in suburban Long Island. Was able to attend Syracuse University and play football here and get an education here and play professionally. And so when at 29 years old, I was considering this conversation around masculinity, there was nothing that spoke to how and why I identified or how I understood masculinity. There was nothing in the literature about me. And so that was almost 30 years ago. And we are still in many ways in that same space where the only time we talk to men about masculinity and what it means to be a whole man is in the aftermath of violence against women, or in the context of violence against women. And one of the things, and this is sort of a sidebar, but I do want to talk to these men about this tonight. One of the things that's sort of emerged over the last couple of years, and we're going to challenge some of this today. About a year and a half ago, a book was published by a guy named Richard Reeves, a Brookings Institution scholar, who wrote a book called Of Boys and Men, looking at different metrics in society: morbidity, addiction, education, healthcare, and a number of different metrics. And everywhere he looked, men were falling behind, men were struggling. But the sentiment generally still from men and women was, so what? Men have privilege, men have every advantage, boys have had every advantage. Why should we care? And in that time, other things, another NYU scholar, Scott Galloway, talks about what's going on with men and boys and loneliness and all these different ways in which we've defined masculinity have adversely impacted the lives of men first. And the problems that men have then get transferred to our relationships with women and others. And so part of tonight is going to be looking at how we understand masculinity and how It needs to, as I say, evolve. And one of the things that we've introduced here on campus, and again, some familiar faces. Last year, we started doing some work, and I say we, with student engagement, have been talking about aspirational masculinity, and not necessarily talking to men because we want men to do something for women and girls, but we want men to do something for ourselves. And so when we talk and have talked with some of the different fraternities and student athletes, the Men of Color Initiative, and a few other groups, cohort groups of men, we've been talking about what do we want for you as men. And I talk about living in awe, authentic, whole, and evolving. And the evolving piece might not be something that some of you, especially the young men in here, are thinking about now, but I throw myself into this category because one of the things we say about manhood very often is that it's this place that you get to, you arrive to your manhood, and then you spend most of your life defending it because it's flawed in so many ways. And I don't believe that manhood is something that you arrive at and you're done. It is constantly evolving. I'm 58 years old, going through a lot of changes in my life, and I have to evolve with those changes. I have to evolve and continue to grow. And so one of the things that I will challenge with these young men, some young, some I just look right at you with these men is, what does that look like? What does that masculinity conversation, how does it sound like when you're talking with young men, but then you're talking with older men who are experiencing it in a little different way? So what I'd like to do, and I'm going to kind of sit off to the side here, but what I like to do is I really want to hear from each one of you, kind of describe. And this is something that I've asked, men in fraternities, and I want to hear from people about when we hear that term masculinity. What does it conjure? What does it mean to you? The term masculinity in and of itself. What does it mean to you? And anyone can go first.
I'll go because I'm at the end. So masculinity, as a kid, growing up, especially as a boy, you're taught men are supposed to do these things, supposed to be strong, no feelings, do whatever. The idea of masculinity definitely perpetuated through my teachers, my family, my friends, was to be a solid person, someone who isn't going to falter from an emotional problem. That's what we were taught as masculinity. That is something that, although it can be flawed, it is a way that people use their masculinity as a shield. People say my masculinity is my identity, and it's going to take time for people to realize that your masculinity isn't just you.
So I thought, right, you grow up and you go to college because you're supposed to. That's what I was taught, right? And then you get married, buy a big house, and then you have a family. And so that was the context. And so my short 2.5-year marriage ended. And I'm like, what's a man? So I'm 44. I'm in a gym full of about 60 students. I'm looking at about, 25 boys balling up and down the court. And I'm like, if someone doesn't teach them that there's a different concept of masculinity, a different concept of being a man, they're going to experience the same pain. So that started this last 18-year journey. And so in the building men world, we talk about a man being a sir, right? Someone with significance, integrity, and values, and builds relationships. And so that when I think about masculinity, I think about, someone that has significance, right? Is living for a greater cause. Someone that has integrity, is honest within themselves, has faith, love, endurance, because it is a long journey, and gentleness.
So we got the questions beforehand, and I decided, what? Let me ask my male friends what they think masculinity is too. And these were their responses. Wow. 2 people asked if ChatGTP could answer that for them. One person said, if you don't like the question, you can ask another question instead of asking about masculinity. And then I think my personal favorite was my friend who called me immediately after I texted him and said, you can't drop that question on me at 10:30 in the morning. I got stuff to do. So the fact that is where the conversation even started with this. And then I got to pull at them a little bit. And it really came down to two things: protection and power. And I think it's interesting on how they define protection, because I think that it can be a positive in the sense of there are people that I care about. I want to make sure that they're safe. And it also became a conversation about, well, can these people, women specifically, protect themselves? Or do I have to step in and be able to do that for them? And then power also came up. And again, there's nothing wrong with being bigger, faster, stronger, especially if you're an athlete. But also, what does that mean when that is your identity of trying to be bigger, faster, stronger? And that power also means not being able to show emotion. And power also means, being in control of these certain situations. So that was how I define masculinity through that and my friends. And I think it's interesting how many different things power and protection can mean.
For me, when I think about masculinity, I feel like it's something that's formulated based on context. And I think that we would be sending a misconception if we thought that like to be a man is one thing. So like for me, coming from a working class family, be a black man, coming from Brooklyn, New York, for what I come to define to be a man is much different from what other men may define or attach to being masculine. So I feel like it's all based on context. And the thing that I use, 'cause I was thinking about it, like how do I effectively explain it? I was thinking of animals, right? I was thinking like a woolly mammoth and an elephant. A woolly mammoth have a certain coat that they have gotten in order to survive in the cold, while elephant in Africa don't have that same coat, but they're supposed to be a part of that same evolution, right? And I'm saying like in context of masculinity, what it means to be a man or how we define being a man coming from Brooklyn, being black on Bed-Stuy in Gates Avenue is much different from how somebody else may deem masculinity. And then so it's not monolithic. How we show our masculinity, how we show love is much different. And the only thing I attach to like toxic masculinity in my mind thus far is when we attach our masculinity to being either attached to our monetary compensations or what we contribute monetarily. Because I think like a lot of men, we feel like who we are as a men is based on our contributions of money. And a lot of time the world make it seem like that's the only thing we contribute to our household or society, but we contribute much more than just that. So I think further in that conversation, understanding what we contribute outside of just what's come out of our pockets, and then understanding that there's some things that a child can only learn from their father, and various things that I'll break down as we continue to converse. But for me, I think that masculinity, how it's defined, is based on context.
So when I'm thinking about masculinity, I think back to when I was younger and how some of the things that we were taught, how they transcended as I grew older. And I'm thinking mainly about strength. When we think of masculinity, strength comes to mind. But in that same context, strength has its, variations. And for me, when I was thinking of masculinity and strength in that same context, I'm thinking about the use of that strength. And in certain ways, the intelligence and the ability to know when and how to use that strength. There were times growing up where I have friends that are smaller than me in size and stature, and we'd make jokes and they're joking at me, and then go a little too hard at times, and people are looking at me like, "Whoa, oh, why don't you grab him up or shake him up? Put him down, like he's smaller than you." And I didn't understand that I even had that understanding then that I do now, that there is a reservation in using that strength that actually is the true strength, knowing that you do have the ability to exert your will, your power, your strength over someone, but reserving that because you understand and you're thinking that that's not what's going to make me a man. Me being able to exert my will, physically dominate a person, is not true strength. True strength is being able to control yourself and to control your emotions, is what we're taught also. And I think in that same context, men are, taught, not to show emotions. We talk about throwing some dirt on it. Boys don't cry and things of that nature. But again, true strength is being able to understand the emotions and the feelings that you have and be able to express them in a controlled and a very efficient, successful way. I revert back to a time where I'm sitting in the building men's program, and there's a young man who's talking about some hard times in his life. He's talking about his mother, and he's overcome with emotion, and he didn't push that down. And I waited to see the response from his classmates and his other members, and what they did was they circled around him and provided support and love, and they allowed him to feel those things, and they joined in with him. So having the ability to feel those things and control those things and accept those is also what I think is, what makes a true man is you're feeling those things, allow yourself to feel those things. And that is a true sign of strength.
Jared, you just kind of like wrapped up part of where I wanted to go next, because I'm glad you got to the part about feelings and what we are allowed to express in our wholeness. And I'm not gonna pick on everyone's response. But it was interesting when you talked about, Adam, you talked about being what we are taught, right? And Joe, we don't really think about it until we go through something in our lives that makes us think, who am I and where am I? Like every single one of you brought up something that made me think of like part of what's often not makes the conversation difficult, but how we very often deflect the conversation or don't think about it at all. Because something else is bigger than so Brian, when you talked about, bless you, when you talked about, you said I called my friends. I'm like, I wanted to stop and say, wait a minute, you don't get to call a friend. This is not that show, right? What do you think, right? Because that's the other thing that we do is we want to incorporate what our peers think, because there's safety in that, right? Because then we can come to some consensus, and then maybe what I'm thinking might not be, criticized or scrutinized in a way, and then bringing up our background, our race, our nationality, our culture, that sometimes masculinity, it gives us I'm not gonna say it's an excuse, because every culture uses it, especially when you start talking about things like domestic violence in our relationship in family and patriarchy, is that we'll say, well, you don't know my culture. Every culture. And I challenge anyone in here, unless you come from some small little village in the jungle in South America, every one of us come from that patriarchal culture. And as we approach the holidays, think about Thanksgiving and what that scene looks like in a lot of our families. And it transcends very often culture. But then you got to that last point. You started talking about feelings. So if I broke down what each one of you said, you talked about being what we're taught, what we respond to, what our role is as protectors, as providers. Those are all the kind of I don't want to say safe, but those are kind of the safe places we go. I learned this from talking with fraternity guys last year, because I would say, what does it mean to be a man? And we would hear, be a protector, be a provider, survivor, right? And all those things that we do, and that we're supposed to do for others, or we're supposed to show up for others. I want to know from you, in that knee-jerk response of what it means to be a man, or what we think of the term masculinity, which we kind of conflated those two thoughts. What's missing from that definition? What's missing from from the ways in which, Adam, you said we are taught? What's missing in how masculinity has been defined? And I'll say this to you all individually, and do this for us. What's missing in how masculinity is defined from how you define yourself as a man in your wholeness? Does that question make sense?
I guess in a way kind of echoes what I was saying. In my mind, I'm thinking the word comes to mind, tenderness, which is, when you think about it, the antithesis of what people might think of when they're thinking of a man, masculinity, strength, power, all of those things. And I think when we look at it like that, when we're looking at what is missing, we kind of look at what's the prototypical definitions of a man and woman and male and female gender roles, and how some of those things are supposed to be confined to one specific area. And tenderness is one that is quite often reflected in a definition of what a female might be, but that is something that men at times feel like they aren't allowed to be. And I think that, internal conflict and battle that a male might have with that feeling, causes a lot of outward, ramifications. And so for me, I think that is one of the things that pops to mind quite often is, there is that tender side, that tenderness. And I think we'll even say in my culture, there's that is a euphemism for kind of a slang term to downgrade someone. You're being tender, so it's actually used as a way to denigrate a man instead of actually something that we should be promoting.
This is not an optional answer. So this is what I'm telling you, and this is almost like a personal thing for me. I'm getting mad at good men who are not saying what's missing from the narrow definition that we just let go. So I want to hear from all of you good men. What is missing from that definition?
I think very close to tenderness is vulnerability. And that's something that I talk about in sessions with all of my male clients. It is absolutely amazing how little vulnerability these males that I work with have outside of the therapy sessions. So many people come to me, and I remember, right now we're a little busy, so I had to schedule them a bit out. And 3 of my male clients were like, "You can't see me sooner. Can you please get me in somewhere?" And I ask them, "What's so important about seeing you sooner?" And all of them had the same answer of, "This is the only place where I can express myself." My friends, I do not trust them to hold all of what I'm feeling. I do not trust myself to express myself when I am dealing with that. And the fact that there's only one place for about an hour right now, about every 2 weeks, where they can do that, I think that's where we really need to start improving about when we're talking about masculinity, is being able to be tender, being able to be vulnerable with each other, because that then creates a whole other cascade of problems.
Yeah, for me, I'm gonna say love, but love in the context of men having love for one another. I think that's an absent thing or dialogue that we don't often have. But it's imperative. Like when you see a father and a son, show a certain amount of sympathy or empathy for one another, hugs. When a father kisses his son. But a lot of us, or I'm not gonna speak for generalizing, but I didn't have my biological father in my life, but I did have my stepfather. Me and my stepfather, I think about it now, we never say "I love you," right? We never said that to inner core, but I say it to my brother, I say it to my friends. To know that you still good loving me and while still being to me, and I think is an absent conversation. But understanding that context, it was something we just don't speak about often. I think also the idea of being hurt. We try to mask that. We don't. As men, we see being hurt as as some form of weakness. But we got to learn how to find strength and vulnerability. But I also feel like it's I'm saying in context. It's shown different, right? It's no one way that men express emotions. For me, I'm very vocal and I'm talkative. So if I'm hurt, I'm not going to talk. So you also got to understand that some people show that emotion different. I think the world or society try to deem masculine to be one way. We have to effectively communicate our emotions. That's not how all men. Everybody not going in tune and say, "I'm hurt. You hurt me because you did this." That's not how all men communicate their feelings. So I think coming to understand in context that certain men communicate differently contingent upon our environment. Because I can't walk around Gates Avenue, Brooklyn, New York, crying outside. But I could go in my house or I could go with my friends. We could have a dialogue, conversation, of intimacy. But in public, and definitely in the age of social media, everything don't belong on media. If I lose one of my friends, which I have lost, I'm not going on Instagram crying and posting stuff. That's not how we communicate or show that form of emotional vulnerability as men where I'm from, right? So I think that's in context and having that conversation, dialogue. But I think the most important one is understanding that you could love each other as men. You know what I mean? And that don't change nothing about you. So
I like that. I agree with that. For years, could not tell my father I loved him, and he doesn't tell me, but my son all the time without even getting off the phone, and some of my boys, be able to do that. And it's very freeing. But great question. You challenged me on that one. I'm going to say connectedness, right? So we're going to have a conversation. We're going to end the conversation when the problem is solved, and then we're moving on. But man, my wife wants to have a conversation just because she wants to have a conversation. I'm like, what's the point of the conversation? There's no point of the conversation, right? And she wants to know about what's going on with me, but there's nothing going on with me. But she doesn't, it's not what's going on with me. There's a connectedness there that is missing. right? So when you ask me what's missing in my masculinity, there's that connectedness. When the conversation is over, the conversation is over. We don't need to talk anymore. The problem is solved. We'll move on to the next thing, because that's what I do. And I'm learning now that it's not about solving the problem. It's not about the reason why I called. There's a connection there. There's a relationship that needs to develop. And that's like the funniest thing, right? Is I talk about relationships all the time with my boys, but that is the hardest thing for me. There's a friend of mine that we try to go to breakfast once a month. Doesn't hit all the time, but that's the one place it's just, for the last 17 years, we can just talk. And there's no questions, there's no answers, it's just conversation. There's a connection there. There's a love there, a vulnerability of just talking about real stuff. And it takes me a long time to get to that space, and so that's what's missing, is that connectiveness, just the ability to have the empathy, to be able to love, to be able just to be present and enjoy the presence of somebody else.
Yeah, for one word has been sticking out to me when all four of these men were talking is acceptance, and accepting your own shortcomings, accepting the fact that you are vulnerable, you do love, you have empathy. Sometimes people don't believe that they have these, even if they are deeply, deeply ingrained in them. You still have to accept it. And with the acceptation of that, you'll be able to truly see like how important these values are for yourself as a person who's empathetic in both your relationships, like you said, to yourself, to your brother, to the people you work with. Having that empathic relationship between yourself as a person and them as a person, not between you as a man and them as a man, you as a man and them as a woman, is really the way for you to truly accept the masculinity that you have.
So I've been doing this work a long time, and I've had a lot of conversations. And if you see me grinning at what you all are saying, and I don't know if other people are feeling this, the amount of times that we talk about this kind of stuff, we don't say these things out loud, which is why I was saying that this was not an optional response. And Brian, you said something that really sparked me, and I'm going to challenge y'all again, I hope. And that is, when you have a client who says, I really need to talk to you now. And you say, why? And why all of a sudden? It's not all of a sudden. It's that's my hour, right? Don't take my hour away. I count on that hour, because the rest of the time, somebody said, I don't trust my friends. Then how are they your friends? Right? I mean, I think one of the loneliest things you can feel is if you are dealing with something and you're thinking about something, but you're around people and you can't fully express it. That's an emotional prison. And I see you all nod your head. So I'm going to ask you all individually. And you talked about being hurt leads to silence, and not trusting friends, and not having that connected, and needing that breakfast at once a month. And Jeff Mangram and I, some of y'all may know Professor Mangram, and he's my go-to, right? And he'll call me up. I haven't heard from you in a couple of days. You're all right. And so I'm gonna ask you that piece about being hurt is something that we don't talk about. I was just talking about this earlier today with a colleague about, in my family, I'm the youngest of 5. I used to get beat up by my 2 older brothers. They were both athletes. And I got beat up almost every day by my brothers. I'm 58 years old. When my family gets together, we just got together about a week ago, those stories of me getting beat up come up almost immediately from my older sister. And she starts laughing about, remember how Donald got beat up? Remember? And I finally articulated it today, that it hurts. It hurts my feelings. And I'm angry with my siblings. I'm 58 years old. I'm a grown-ass man. I don't want to hear about what happened when I was 5. Right? And so there's hurt there. There's hurt and there's shame. I've never said this publicly until just now, until a conversation I had earlier today on the phone, because I was talking about that shame that we carry as boys when we first get hurt, and we first then suppress the vulnerability. So I want to know from you, just because I just did this myself, right? Can you trace that moment, that when you realized you couldn't trust your friends, that moment when you were hurt and you said, I'm never going to let this part of myself be exposed again? because that's at the core of all the problems, as somebody said, all the problems that get transferred to our relationships, and all the problems that we as men face later in life. Can you trace that to a time? And maybe I'm asking you to disclose something that might be hard to disclose, but I want to be able to do that, because part of this conversation is for the benefit of the people in the room and the people who may be hearing this being live streamed, that they're not alone in that place, that they carry some shame, some vulnerability, some pain.
So I guess I would challenge you also, when we're thinking about this, when we're thinking about the context of what Brian was saying, that the young man didn't feel comfortable with his friends and expressing himself. I would say that it's not necessarily anything that he had to work on or anything that he was struggling with. It is something that we're dealing with when we're talking about masculinity. We're talking about not something that his client had to deal with, but we're talking about his friends having to address something. It's not that there's something wrong with them, it's something that is inbred in them, that you understand that in a circle of men, you will be the outlier if you decide to open up and express yourself, because we understand that those constant terms that we use to define men don't allow for that person to open up and express themselves. It is about educating the friends that you're with so they can be more receptive to you being vulnerable, to you opening up to them. I know for me, there were a few instances where I can think of my close friends, and my older brothers included, in that we're adults now, and so we have a different relationship than we did when we were kids. And we have two of our best friends that we grew up with that is my inner circle. And there have been moments where I have, shot out a text to them and said, guys, I need you. I need to talk. I need to check in. And they are dropping at a hat, we're there, what's going on, no matter what you're doing. And I've allowed myself to do that because I know what I'm going to receive. There were times growing up where that's not the same, where you have some friends. I had friends in high school that you talk about, even if it is something as simple as, this girl broke my heart, and what do we get? Grow up, man. Get over it. There's another girl out there. Forget about it. Instead of saying, hey, let's talk about it. You all right? What's going on? And so understanding that, in my instances, my circle changed, but because they did the work to be able to be more open to having those vulnerable conversations, to us dropping what we're doing and allowing that person to express. I will say that I'm fortunate because my brother is a psychologist too, so he is more versed in that, and in the ability to hear, listen, and receive some of those comments. So again, like I said, I'm fortunate in that respect. But I think the other two individuals in my circle learned from him as well, and they grew. And then they also took the opportunities to do the same. Hey, let's get a check-in this weekend. Let's talk. I'm going through some things, and we all know. Let's drop it. Let's listen. Let's be there. So there's moments that I can reflect on, and then moments that I use in my relationships going forward with my brothers, that what I call them, that allow for us to have those open, vulnerable conversations that allow for actual growth and, to your point, resolutions. We're having conversations because there's something going on, and let's talk, let me vent, and let's see how we can get to the other side of that.
I think it starts like on the playground, right? You're growing up, you'd have all these male idols. I don't know about you, but I always wanted to be in the NBA, about a foot short for that. So I tried, to be that masculine guy on the playground. Can't play like a girl, can't throw like a girl, get up, rub some dirt on it. And it gets better over time, it gets better. And then I went to an all-male high school. And the conversations that were had in an all-male high school about women, what women's roles are, were utterly disturbing. Viewing women as objects, viewing women as lesser, viewing women as, quite frankly, less than human. because that was the environment. Not because I actually think that they believe it. I really don't believe that a lot of the things that were said were believed, but rather that's what they thought that they had to say in order to fit in. That's what it meant to stand out in that school, where you needed to be the most masculine of the masculine because it was all guys there. What were the things that you had to say? And for some reason, that was putting other people down, both men and women, but especially women. So if those are the conversations that we are talking about, don't be a girl. Don't do this. Don't be emotional because that's feminine. It's very hard to get out of that track if that conversation starts so early and is so prevalent among other men.
I'll accept the challenge. So my mentor laughs at me because I can't cry. And my daughter and wife were watching one of the movies, like the Hallmark Channel and stuff, and, Disney movies, they'll look over at me and just check. And they say, and because when my wife left me, at that point, I made a vow that I will never let a girl hurt me. I will never let a woman hurt me again. And from that point on, I can't cry. And I'm not sure why. And, I've spoken to people, and I try to do the internal work, and I have a couple coaches. It's funny, I was in my 20s. I didn't need to talk to nobody. I had all this on lock, and now I got like 5 people I talk to on a regular basis, because I try to unpack some of this stuff, because I was a push down kind of guy. I got involved in a lot of drugs and alcohol, and just kind of kept pushing it down. And it's taken many, many years to kind of unpack a lot of this stuff, and some stuff still hasn't unpacked yet, right? And so I realized, things like forgiveness and grace weren't part of my vocabulary. It was all about anger, resentment. It was about holding a grudge. It was about revenge. It was about getting you back. It was about being tough. It was about holding things down. And we're talking about being vulnerable and talking about being able to have conversations with people for real. These things come up, and trying to process this stuff and trying to get to a place of healing. Because when I grew up, with my dad, it's not like, we couldn't talk, but you just didn't show emotion, right? You just, and just like, you talked on really how you doing, as long as I did good in school, and everything was okay. That was it as far as it went. And I kind of took that and ran with that, and so, it's hurt, and from that point on, that's just something that has continued to be in here that I don't talk about. But there needs to be a sense of healing. Otherwise, I'm going to be incomplete, and, it impacts the relationships I have, and I can see a lot of that, and we just kind of continue to try to work through that.
Honestly, before actually sitting right here during this panel, I realized basically an epiphany. Growing up, playing sports my entire life, everything physical, anything that was crying had to deal with physical. I get injured on the soccer field, I might cry because of pain. Anything emotional was kind of just bottled up. A lot of men do that. You bottle up your emotions and then it's fine. It took for my girlfriend saying she's proud of me for me to actually cry. All my life I was told, oh, you got an A on that test, expected. You made varsity, expected. You got to a good school, expected. Seeing that someone is actually proud of you, even if other people who said that was expected, they were proud of me, just the words, I'm proud of you, have so much power and can let you drop down all the walls that you built up for the past 20 years. And I'm proud of you it's beautiful. And that was the moment in my life that I was able to show my true colors to someone else who wasn't in my family. And even for the people in my family, my parents, I don't know if I would have been able to ever do that from them not saying, I'm proud of you. So just a simple, I'm proud of you, were probably the 3 strongest words that I've ever heard in my entire life.
Yeah. For me, I remember the first hurt, right? And I think that I'm gonna preface it by first saying that I think a lot of our pain come from like the lack of commitment from people that we felt should have fulfilled the commitment to us, and many times that's our parents, right? So I remember, and I never told the story out loud. It's funny, but I was 3, and I remember during when I was 3 years, I was asleep between my mom and my dad at that time. And I remember I woke up one day and my mom was crying. She had like a letter in her hand, and my father wasn't there. And as I got older, I came to understand that the letter was him explaining his departure. So when I woke up, my pops was no longer there. He moved to Florida. My mom woke up and she was crying. And I never seen my pops for like the next like 6 to 10 years from that moment. And then what hurt was I remember one of my friends, Jeremiah, his pops used to come to every basketball game, and I was an athlete. And I never articulated it hurt, but as I'm thinking about it now, that it was a pain because whenever I seen his father, presence, father was at every camp, every basketball game, every teachers' parents conference. And I was sitting and thinking, like, damn, with my pops, I used to think that at the younger age, and I feel like we feel like children don't understand what's going on. When we understand, we just aren't at the age where we can effectively put it into words. But we understand. We have a cognitive ability to understand and grasp what's going on, even at a younger age. So I remember at 3 when my father left. And as I think about it, I think that's a sense of void. And I remember when I went to therapy, if you ever go to a therapist, some of them have like this glacier on the board. It's a picture. And under the glacier is something that's underlying that we don't focus on. We think about everything that's above the surface, but it's what's under the water. And I remember one time she was like, I don't know, we got in a conversation, and she was like, what about your father not being there? I said, oh, no, I'm out. I think she's starting problems. Like, what is this lady talking about? I came to tell you my day is bad. You talking about my father leaving at 3. But what we don't understand is how like certain things that happen to us as children does have a generational effect on ourselves and our development into the adults that we become. My second hurt was when my first heartbreak. I remember crying so much. I asked God, like, could you help me stop crying? Like, you ain't hurting until you praying to God, like, God, please, if you help me stop crying. I remember that. And what I'm saying is, like, it's those experiences that then causes us to adapt certain characteristics that we deem to be masculine. Because, like, that pain out, my father not here. It's like, all right, what I'm gonna do? I still gotta get to where I gotta go. Ain't no, and then as men, like you saying, I don't know. In my mind, I can't see the king or the father of the house. If he start crying, everything is oh man, we worried. Because everything is relying upon a man in a heteronormative sense, right? When the father cry, oh shoot, it's serious now. It's like when you lead in a pack. If you the leader, I can't, even if we lose somebody, I can't cry because y'all dependent on me. I remember every time I heard my brother cry because he's in the streets. And I remember when he lost his friend, I can remember his cry. Because my brother don't cry. I see him fight anybody. But the time I seen him cry, I'm always gonna remember that. So like, I don't know. I'll try to find some form of discernment, but understand like how do you display emotions. But at the same time, I think that a part of what I deem to be masculine is learning when to subdue certain emotions. You got to learn how to, and so you got to operate. Everything ain't emotional. Some things is rational. Some things you got to make a decision. Feel me? Everything ain't an emotional decision. Some things just like the decision got to be made no matter how I feel. This got to be done. Feel me? And I think that's another part of why I find it hard to decipher. Like, is a man supposed to be fully vulnerable, or you got to find some discernment in regards to how do I display those emotions? But I also got to move on rationality as well. So I mean, that first hurt was from the absence of my father.
Can I speak to that, bro?
Yeah,
I think
yes.
that moved me quite a bit. I mean, I can appreciate that, wholeheartedly. And I think that emotional piece that we're talking about is exactly kind of what I mentioned in the beginning, is that we're looking at a situation where men aren't comfortable or feel like they can exhibit that type of emotion, whether it's through crying, sadness, frustrations, and all of those different emotions. And I think you're exactly right that there is a point where you look at it and say, what am I going to do? I'm going to sit here and cry. That solves nothing. And I think that's where I was talking about in that strength, is that where you understand your emotions, you can feel your emotions, but you don't allow it to control you. When we're thinking about the context of domestic violence, those are individuals that are being controlled by their emotions and is exerting itself in a very negative, horrible way. Because they aren't capable of handling their emotions, whether it's sadness, anger, frustration, despair. And so understanding you have those feelings, understanding those emotions exist, that they are underlying, and then understanding that when they come up, that it's okay, but how are you going to handle them? How are you going to address them? And having that emotional intelligence is key, because there's something good about feeling your emotions, but let's not go too far and say let your emotions totally run you and put you in a corner and curl up. And I think that is something that we can, address when we're talking about masculinity. Feel the emotions. That's okay. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to cry, but you still have things to do. Like, you still got to keep moving. You still have things to get done, and you are unable to do those things, or you're unable to do those things in a very controlled way and efficient way if you aren't willing and able to actually acknowledge and address and handle the emotions that you're feeling.
So you I can feel some colleagues in the room who are probably feeling the same thing I'm feeling, which is I just love listening to y'all talk about the things that in all the years that I've been doing this work around talking with men about masculinity. It's always been about the as I've always said, I was more accountable to women who weren't in the room than to the who were. And more recently, I want to bring women who I've worked with and other who don't always believe that men can do what y'all are doing right now. Don't believe that you'll say what you said about someone saying they're proud of you. Like that brought me to tears. Just hearing that you say that, because sounds like a small thing, and people say, "Come on, man, what are you?" Right? That is huge. And to say the things that you say, and Jordan, you going back to when you were 3, right? And tracing it back, how long you've been carrying that. You brought that 3-year-old to Syracuse University, right? You brought that 3-year-old to this campus. That's the young man that came to this campus, and now we're trying to unpack that for you in terms of trying to talk about masculinity. And so how much history is in there. And as y'all were talking, and Joe, when you mentioned not crying, I want to tell stories because I got a ton of stories. Those of y'all who know me just know I like to talk, and I got a lot of stories. And I wanted to tell a story about being at this film at the theater to see Les Miserables with another football player, and both of us were trying not to cry, right? And I was doing this thinking, if I do this, the tears won't come out. And then I looked over with him, and he was doing this, like there was a button that he could press that's going to keep him from coming out. And it was a scene, if you've ever seen the play, it's a powerful, emotional scene that if you don't cry, you don't have a central nervous system, right? And it was one of those moments where I think back on my inability to cry. But I want to share. Yeah. You might. I'm telling you. It's a play. I'm gonna take it as a play. Now we're gonna go to the show, and you're gonna be in the midst, and your central nervous system is gonna go, "Oh, here I am." So, but I want to ask about you talked to Jordan, you talked about your dad, and one quick story that I do want to share. I won't go into great detail. I got hurt in a game here in the Dome, and I was unconscious, and I got knocked out. And then when I came to, I heard one of my roommates, who was a defensive player, I was an offensive player, was a defensive player, was on the field. And I said to the trainer, "Why is Doug Pino on the field?" He goes, "Well, it was 4th down and you didn't make it." So I was out long enough for them to switch out offense and defense on the field. And when I came to, I made a gesture on the field that I knew my father and my brother would know me saying to them, "I'm okay." And I did that. That was 38 years ago. And my father died 12 years ago. 11 years ago, my mother died 6 years ago. Right before my mother died, I knew she was going to die because she started confessing. She started telling the truth about some things. And I was telling that story about how my father and my brother saw that gesture, and we laughed about it. And for decades, we laughed about it. Remember that thing you did on the field? And my mother looked at me when I was explaining that story to my daughters. My mother looked at me like a little bit of regret in her face. I said, "What's that look?" She goes, "Your father never actually saw the gesture because he was on the concourse of the Dome crying. I never saw my father cry. Not only was I angry with him because I automatically thought that I never saw him cry, I was not only angry with him that he never told me that he never saw it before he died. I was angry that he let me think it was funny, that we laughed about that. that him watching his son unconscious on the stadium floor was funny. And I thought, how many times did I tell somebody that they should ignore their feelings because I learned to ignore mine from him? Or I learned to mock my feelings or dismiss my own feelings. And so the question I have to all of you, and Jordan, you kind of sparked this in, is, and Joe, y'all don't know, Joe Horan runs one of the best programs, Building Men program, one of the best programs of talking to young men in the country, hands down. And it's because he shows up, and he shows up like this, authentic and honest. But I have a question, because you talked about not being, and you said you talked to my mentor, and to me, you're the mentor. You're the mentor of mentors. So you have a mentor. You talked about your family and what you can express. I want to know from you all, who did you learn from watching masculinity? Who did you learn from? And if I can, because I want to there's so many things I want to give people a chance to ask questions. But I have the sort of a follow-up there. Who'd you learn from? Now, let me stop there, because I don't want to give people an excuse to not answer that first part. Who did you learn from?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like most guys, my father, like, even though it is the stereotypical answer, I learned everything from him. I learned how to dress myself in the morning. I have learned how to get out of the house. I learned my masculinity from him, not just because he was my father, but also he was my coach growing up. Taught me for 15 years for soccer. He was the one who convinced me to try, maybe go college, do all that. So now thinking about it, I've never seen him cry in my life. I was thinking about that while sitting here. I've never seen my father cry before. And I don't know if that's him being strong for me or him trying to be strong for himself. But when you think about it, and to all you guys, do you ever remember seeing your father cry?
Raise your hand if you see your father cry.
Okay, well, actually, it's most of you, but there are a couple.
It's just us. That's
Yeah,
messed
no,
up.
okay. No, but there were a couple who didn't raise their hands. So it shows that it might be a big experience for a lot of people, but some people haven't seen their father cry. And as my mentor, it just put a thought in my head.
So it was my mentor, right? So when I got sober, I was just messed. I was angry, right? Just angry. And so what he did is he helped me unpack all these emotions. When I thought I was angry, he said, "No, you're hurt." He said, "No, you're sad." First time I knew what sad felt like, right? He said, "All right, no, this time you're frustrated." And so I would go to him and we would talk about, what happened in my life and what was going on. And he would kind of put some language, like you're talking about emotional intelligence. Like mine was almost zero at that point, right? I didn't know, and I didn't have the language, right? And so could I not only talk to my friends, I couldn't talk to my friends. I didn't have the language to talk to my friends. And so everything was just a front. Everything else just, talking about, what I thought, I went to functions and I acted like I thought you wanted me to act. And so there was nothing authentic about it. I wasn't really being myself. I wasn't explaining any emotion. I went to calling hours. I was sad because everybody else was sad. So I tried to make myself sad. And it was through many conversations over a long time and over a course of years trying to understand what this was, because there wasn't a lot of examples that I had when I was growing up, and my parents they were great. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and talk bad. I just wasn't. I was not talking. I was a quiet one. I don't know about you, but the loud person in my family wins, and my family is loud. And I was not talking a lot, and so I just was keeping everything in, and I just held everything in, and until we started having these conversations and trying to understand what was going on the inside, that's when I started growing, and so I was 29 and he looked right dead at me and he says, "Well, you're finally starting to grow up now," and so I was a little bit later than most, but it was a process I had to go through, that has allowed me to be able to take these experiences and help other people, knowing that other people could be the same as me, right? They could be keeping it in. They could not know what it is. They just need this avenue to talk about it in this place in a safe space. And so that's what we do, right? We create a safe space to have these conversations where someone can say, this and this and this happened. And then we can say, well, did you think about this? Did you think about this? What about that? And just have a place where I can, because I didn't have that space, or I didn't feel like I could put myself out in that space to talk about these things. And so, that was my example, right? And then, he grabbed me in the head and he kissed me on the cheek. He'd tell me he loved me. And I'm like, what is this guy doing? And it was uncomfortable and it was awkward. But after a while, it's like, wow, that's what it really is all about, and your point, man, those are 3 powerful words. When I was 45, I went and asked my dad, have you ever been proud of me? And that was just an intense conversation, man. And that was freeing too, because I didn't know up to that point, man. So I understand that.
I keep thinking about this question, and I keep going back to the same person who is my mom, because I think it's interesting that the traits that we defined masculinity for, powerful protector, being able to have that vulnerability potentially, like my mom was the one who taught me that. And, all of those things, I think we talk about masculinity, but there are some things that are universal among gender. And also, like, my mom is a prosecutor with a 97% success rate. I've never won an argument with her in my life. So, like, kind of those traits, I think, have been passed down to me, even though it wasn't from a male figure. It is what I view masculinity as right now.
Yeah, for me, I learned from my stepfather, I say my older brother, and mostly my peers. I know bowling. I remember I was asking Bo because he got a girlfriend. I was like, yo, how did you learn how to nurture or cater towards a woman? Feel me? Like, I think we try to make it like it's innate for women to be nurturers, but no, that's something that you learn. Feel me? And I ain't gonna lie, I remember I was like, yo, Bo, how you learn how to do that? Like, it's a learning thing because I never seen, my stepfather's not really affectionate, but I'm an affectionate person. So I never seen a man really be affectionate to a woman. You know what I mean? I expected to see something like hug in the morning, kiss or something, some type of flirtatious in front, but I never seen that. So it's like you come to understand that you learn a lot from observing and from my peers, but I had to decipher a lot of things. If I went off of what I was taught in a park and stuff, oh my gosh, it'd have been a long story. So I mean, I learned a lot from that. And then like media, I think is a big part. Definitely in our generation, we learn a lot of how you supposed to move as a man, or what you think you should move like based on social media.
So I guess the question for me needs some clarification, because you ask, who do we learn masculinity from? So the question I have in order to answer mine is, are we talking about what we think masculinity is, or what we now know as mature men, what masculinity actually is, what it actually allows? Because there's 2 different ones.
This is the second time you're throwing back something back. I want to keep, so we're going to keep doing that. No, it's a good question. So my answer would be, who did you learn from the masculinity that you live?
And I think I would echo Brian. I think that's what I perceive the question to be. And honestly, I think Brian hit it on the head, and I echo that. My mother, because growing up, I had been called sensitive all the time. I get emotional. I would cry. My father, he's a strong man, and I respected him for that. Suck it up, don't cry. My mother was there to back me and say, no, it's okay to cry. Leave him alone. It's all right. And also in that same respect, I'm okay with telling my father I love him, and he'd have to give me a look. And she said, tell him you love him. It's okay. You can say you love your son, give him a hug. He's okay. You can hug your son. And, and to his credit, he became more comfortable. He didn't grow up that way. He tells me, my father never told me he loved me. That just didn't happen. I don't remember him ever saying I love you. He can honestly say he probably remembers his mother saying it once. They were loving parents. I knew them very well, and they were amazing. But that's just not something that happened. And so that's something that was passed on to him. And that discomfort came also. And it took him some time to understand that that's okay. You do feel it. You can express it. You can give a hug, and it's okay. And he had been really good about that. But that came from my mother, allowing me to feel those things, allowing me to say I love you to my brother and to my father, and knowing that that's okay. You know, that level of sensitivity was fostered through my mother, and it actually, to your point where you're saying how do I define it today? How does it guide me today? You know, my unit in the special victims unit is 7 females, and I'm the only male. I run a unit of females, and I think partly because of that the unit requires that certain level of emotional intelligence and sensitivity, because you're dealing with such sensitive topics and dynamics and relationships and conversations. It does not allow for you to shy away from those. It does not allow for you to be uncomfortable with having emotional, sensitive conversations that are long lasting. So, to my mother's credit, my ability to have those feelings and feel those and have that emotional intelligence actually guided me into my career as well. And it produced a better relationship with my father and I as well.
You and Brian both talked about your mothers as, and if correct me if I'm not saying this right, but they're examples of what it meant to be a man were intentionally taught and deliberately taught. In other words, it wasn't the passive lessons that we got from watching our fathers, but it was actually what our mothers said. Correct? And why you're in a field where there's a dearth of men, because it's a field that requires that emotional intelligence, and so whether or not necessarily women are drawn to that is not really the point, as much as that men are not being intentional and deliberate in how we teach whole masculinity. Am I being fair in that assessment? Okay. So, and something that George, when we were in Binghamton, you said, what's the role of women in this conversation? And I think one of the roles of women is to continue to teach us as men how to be intentional and deliberate in teaching emotional intelligence or nurturing that. And because, like, I think I probably heard each one of you at one point say, just suck it up. Or the environment in which you grew up, like that all-male school, or that environment where you grew up where you learn from your boys, and there's really no one coming in saying, hey, this is how you do this, right? And show me intentionally, how do you show that love? How do you say it? How do you say it and not hide? Right? And because a lot of times we'll say things that we're insecure about. We'll say and duck, right? Because we don't want to know if the answer is no, right? And so how do you say it and stay present in that? And so my question, and this is the last question for all of you, but that, before we throw it out to people, because we could get into the conversations around the prevention of sexual and domestic violence, and I tend to, while we have you here, I'm always about, that's the whole point of aspirational. What do I want for you? So to the audience of men and women who are here, but also just for you obviously are all men who care about men. You care about others. You care about your peers. So tell me what you want, and please think about, Jordan, when you talked about social media, think about there's an influencer, and I don't really want to bring his name up, but he's a global influencer of masculinity. I'm not gonna say his name. I said I wasn't gonna say his name. But he is giving men something. He's being intentional. He's saying, you want to know what it looks like? Here's what it looks like. And so my question to you all is, what do you want for boys? The boys, whether they're your peers here in school, or young men from your neighborhood, or clients, or men that come through your office, what do you want for them? And what do you hope for them in the context of this intentional conversation around masculinity? Is that question making sense? I'd have been a good talk show host, right? Because I got people thinking. They're like, damn, but it's not good for TV, because then it's like, we got to go to commercial. The guy's got to answer. So yeah, ruin the flow. You can't be thinking. Come on.
So I had a friend growing up, not really friends with them anymore, but they talked about women like I kind of described at the all-male high school, right? And I found it interesting because when we were tired of him, we would make fun of him because he had an attractive sister, just objectively an attractive sister. And we would talk to him about his sister the way that he would talk about other women. And it was amazing the switch that happened. That went from, oh wow, like I'm this manly man, I'm gonna sleep with all these women, I'm gonna get all these women, to how dare you talk to my sister about that. So my main point for that is, and what I'm hoping that everyone takes away, that if you have a sister or any female in your life, if they had your best qualities and your worst qualities, would you want that person to date them? And if the answer is no, why not? And what do you have to do to change to be that person?
I'll kind of stick to the theme of what I've been saying. I guess I would want that young man to be more direct and focused on what they're feeling, taking ownership of what they're going through, not necessarily pushing anything down. There's a program that I'm working with the McMahon Ryan Child Advocacy Center to broaden the scope of the agency to address trauma that young kids experience in the city, whether it's gun violence or street violence, with the understanding that trauma is manifesting itself in negative ways. And part of that reason is because the trauma is not being acknowledged. It's not being accepted. There's not room for the individuals, young boys and young girls, but in the context of the conversation, we're talking about young boys that aren't appreciating that some of the things that they're experiencing are causing negative effects on their life and dulling some of the emotional experiences that they're having. So instead of running from those feelings, setting them aside, pushing them down, and or not even just acknowledging that they exist, is causing harm. So take ownership of what you're experiencing. Take ownership of the trauma that you are going through and work through that. Allow that process to manifest itself in a positive way to help propel you to a better version of yourself, to a better man, and understanding that the person that you are trying to become may look different than what you have been taught and what you've been experiencing, but allow yourself to feel, be in the moment, be in those feelings, and address those things.
So this is what I would want for you. Courage. Courage to be the best version of you. Because everybody's going to be different, right? And society wants us all to be the same. Everybody's got to fit in this little narrow box and do this stuff. But that's not how we were created to be. So one will be courage. Two, have a circle of friends, trusted friends that you can confide in and you can talk to and you can trust. Right? And number three is be curious. Never lose that sense of being young and being curious and asking the questions and having the conversations and diving into things. That's what I'd want.
I think, well, speaking for people around my age, a big problem that we have as men is bottling up emotions. If there's one thing I'd want taken away from this or talking to your friends is it's okay to have the hard conversations. Don't see them as the hard conversations, just see them as a conversation. Don't put a stigma on your conversation because, oh, you're talking about your feelings. Oh, you're talking about this that made you mad, that made you sad. You're just talking. You're talking with your friends. You're talking with the people you love. You're talking with the people that you trust. Like you said, having a circle of friends, having a circle of peers, having multiple circles of friends that you can talk to about specific things. You don't want one person that you're going to every single time. As much as you need to be able to open up yourself, you do need to respect the boundaries of other people and not use the other people as therapists. And don't use yourself as a therapist as well. That goes back to the bottling up. You can't bottle up all your emotions and expect there not to be an eruption.
All right. So I'm gonna break it down to 3. I mean, the first one, I'm gonna go back off of what you stated. I'm gonna say accept emotions. Because there's gonna come a time where your productivity or you're not gonna be able to be productive, get what it is that you want to get done until you address that thing that's caused you the emotional distress. Or a lot of times we try to push our emotions aside and try to get assignments done. But there's a time where nothing can get done until you address the emotion that's at hand. The second one, I'm gonna say it's a charge to first us as upperclassmen and then to the older men in the space. I'm gonna say to the older men is to continue to create spaces like this because a different shift in energy when men get together, and how often do we see that? And I think that's imperative. And then just as upperclassmen, we got to find time to set the time aside to create spaces for the underclassmen that's here as well. So that we could build, like we're saying, if we left to learn from social media. Social media is one of the platforms to which we receive most of our information. And if we allow the dissemination of news or for us to formulate our identity based on the images that portrayed of us as men, it could be a misdirection. And then the last one, I would just say find love for one another. And that's something I'm starting to come to terms with, is that it's okay for men to have love for one another, and how we show that. So continue to work on having love and embracing it within our own cohorts. And that's it.
So, first of all, can y'all give a little love for these guys? And before we wrap up, does anybody have any questions or question? If something's burning, whoever has the.
I'll run the mic.
You can run the mic.
Yep. I love doing this. Why am I that way? I don't know.
Thanks for putting your steps in.
Yep.
Thank
I had to walk
you.
up the hill.
Oh, you got steps. Thank you so much, all of you, for panelisting. My name is Ryan Kongyu, junior, part of MCI, Men of Color Initiative. I must commend first and foremost that message of I'm proud of you. A simple 3 words, but honestly, in this day and age for our generation, is just something that's so big, because the way, McPherson, how you brought up that fact of not being able to ask your dad, or I think it was Haran who talked about asking his dad, actually, are you proud of me? It's something that us, especially as college students, why we're pushing, one of the reasons why we get up every day is because we're seeking that pride from our parents. So I know that's something that's very prevalent, and I'm just very glad that you shared that. My first question is to all of you on masculinity, and my second question will be to you, Mr. Woodfork, on closer to domestic violence. First question is, what's a recent experience where you felt your masculinity challenged, and what did you do to overcome it?
That's a good question. You should have had his job.
So let me take a look. Let me step back for a second. I want to be intentional with my answer too. So there are a lot of scenarios where in my unit we deal with domestic violence cases that are ongoing, that we'll see same parties involved in abuse time and time again. And we will, in my unit, will speak to law enforcement officers that have responded to those continuous calls. And sometimes we'll get instances where the male who is at that time the offender, being believed because of his demeanor, that okay, he was so calm, she was so emotional, and she was erratic, but he was so calm. And he was saying she was making things up, and so trying to be pressed into thinking that because he is calm and collected, that he is worthy of the belief, and having to have those conversations with the officers, that there's an expectation of groupthink, that okay, you understand, you get that, like he's this, he's that, and having to kind of push back and saying, okay, I see what you're saying, but maybe we need to take a deeper look at this as to why she may be behaving that way, why he may be behaving that way, understanding that dynamic, and kind of being able to separate that groupthink philosophy that is unintentionally and sometimes intentionally trying to be put together, and saying, no, we need to step back and look at everything objectively. Let's look at all of the information. Let's step aside and let's actually look at each case, and look at this case individually, and see outside of just what's going on in front. And while it's in a way being forced on me to question and look at this group think, I'm throwing it back on them and saying, okay, maybe you have some preconceived notions and some bias here that maybe we need to address, and we can step back and actually take a full look at what we're dealing with. Like I said, at times I get caught in those moments where because you're a man, you think that we're all going to think the same thing, think how someone is supposed to behave, and I get caught in saying, well, I'm not really, I don't really think the way you do, and kind of putting that back, that there's other ways to think, and that maybe we need to address these things from a different perspective, from a different point of view. So I think I've done that a few times, and I'm, I think that is one of the ways that can come into play.
Did anybody else want to take a shot at that? Challenges your masculinity. And I should not have a voice in this room, and I recognize that, so I'm going to stop.
I have had a couple of people who have come into my office, females, who have talked about sexual violence perpetrated against them. And I've never felt more helpless as a person or a man hearing their stories. And it really made me question, what should I be doing? What is the most helpful thing here? And I think when you asking about masculinity, I'm thinking about roles. What is my role? And I think that this is a, very tragic example, but something that we come across all the time in maybe everyday life, of what is our role here as a person, as a man. And I think that being able to take a step back and say, what is best, not just for me, but all of the people involved, has really helped me answer a lot of those questions.
Yeah, I'm gonna just say, I think throughout my entire life, because what I attach to masculinity is like how we respond to situations. And I think growing up, we was taught that when somebody disrespects you, most times you're gonna respond with like violence. You know what I mean? But it's a poem, it's If by Rudyard Kipling, and it speaks upon like if you can, in the midst of opposition, could you withstand? So it's like if you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs, but blaming it on you. If you can trust yourself when all men doubt you, but make allowance for their doubting too. If you can wait and not be tired by waiting, or being lied about, don't deal in lies, or being hated, don't give way to hating, and yet don't look too good, don't talk too wise. Feel me? But like you got to learn how to, if you could just and face opposition, not never give it back. So if you could be lied about, not dealing lies. So learning just how to reassess how I react to certain situations. And even of recent, there's been certain situations I've been put in where people may be hating, but I can't give way to hating. You know what I mean? So I think just reassessing how we react to certain things is a big part of how we start to reconstruct what we define to be masculine, or what's a masculine response.
Just more directly to the question, in my office, one of the bigger case types that come across my desk that does force all of us to look at that dynamic is when we're thinking about a sexual abuse case that involves a young female and adult male. But then we have the other side where we have a young male who's had sex with an older female, and it's almost just classified as that they just had sex with an older female. And being in that mindset, in that space, I'm forced to, have the detective look at the case. Okay, well, they say, well, it was a young guy. What one young guy wouldn't want to have sex with an older female? Isn't that the dream? And then I push back and I say, well, didn't we just have a case where there was a young female who was, quote unquote, consensually having sex with an older male? Why is that different? Well, it's different. It's the power structure is different. Yes, but what about that dynamic? What are we telling that young boy? Like, what is he going to learn from that experience that he's going through, that he went through? If we're not acknowledging that there isn't a difference, that dynamic, that power dynamic is different, but it exists. And so not acknowledging that contradiction is harmful. And I think that was one of the big cases and big things that I can think of where we're talking about masculinity. Well, men have sex at a young age. They start at a young age. That's just what happens. Okay, maybe is that okay? Is that right? And then now in this context, it's definitely not right. The law says it's not right. So why are we saying that it's okay just because he's a man? That's also shaping and fostering his feelings on women and the relationships that he has with women as he goes throughout his days. And if we're not addressing that or treating that the same way, then we have a problem that we need to address also.
Anybody got any other questions? I'm giving it back to him. I'm going to the back of the room.
So, one of the things you mentioned about that dynamic of a young boy is also the message that that he's supposed to expect women to be at his disposal, and that we don't acknowledge. And I've had cases of men that I've worked with who were perpetrators, and when I asked them to trace their sexual history, it gets revealed that they were sexually assaulted as boys, but not raised or not taught to see it as that. And so they have been, and this is why we talked earlier about being hurt and how that hurt manifests and how that hurt gets displaced and placed on others. That's one of the really big ones, is that we just assume, to your boy, we just assume that boys won't have sex, and don't realize that there's a lot of hurt going on because they're not doing it in their wholeness. They're not doing it in their whole authentic selves. They're doing it as a function of what they think. Going back to what you said, Adam, at the very beginning of this, what they think, what they've been taught they're supposed to do, and not truly who they truly are. I just want to take another moment to give you all a little round of applause for the panel. And thanks to Kelly and the folks at OPDV, to Rob Radsky for being here, for supporting this, Meredith and everyone in the office. And I'm not gonna get it wrong and say the Office of Health Promotion, but Meredith, you want to share your office and where people can learn a little bit more about what you do here on campus?
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thanks for being here. Meredith Patterson. I'm the Assistant Director for Public Health Initiatives in the Health Promotion Office in the Barnes Center. So we are an office on campus that helps to promote health and wellness for our students in a lot of different ways, and have lots of different touch points with students. But we encourage you to engage in conversations like this. You can always stop by and see us. We're located on the first floor right next to the pharmacy. You can find our information on the Barnes Center website, and always happy to engage with folks in conversations like this. So thank you again to our panelists and to Don and OPDV as well.
Okay, so I want to thank all of you for being here tonight. It isn't often that I'm in a room of young men having this conversation. So for me and my job, this conversation was immensely helpful and really great. OPDV is also here as a resource for you. You can find us on our website, and we have stuff that has our hotline on it. I know that George is here as a resource for everybody. Don, can't thank you enough for our partnership and the more work we're going to do together. And all of you, thank you so much. I'm a mom of a 30-year-old male who I think I did a good job with. And I'm going to go tell him how proud I am of him. So thank you all. Yeah. So thank you all very, very much. And thank you to Syracuse University for your continued partnership. Thanks so much.